Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei in Beijing. U.S. President Joe Biden faced the nation in his first presidential media conference on Thursday. He fielded questions on the immigrant surge at the southern border, his COVID-19 relief package, efforts to vaccinate all Americans, and other concerns. The media conference came 64 days after he took office, way behind his 15 most recent predecessors, who all held a solo briefing within 33 days. In the past 2 months, Biden is reported to be focused on securing vaccines and passing his $1.9 trillion rescue package. But he's now faced with a surge in gun violence and racial hate crimes, as well as the new numbers of COVID-19. Abroad, senior officials are working hard from the U.S. to shore up ties with its traditional allies, labeling China, Russia as threats. So can Biden shake off Trump's legacy? To answer that question, let's loop in our panelists. A lot of discussion about international cooperation and China-U.S. relations. Let's listen in. For more on Biden's first presidential press conference, joining us in San Francisco, Bruce McConnell, President and CEO of the East-West Institute and also Distinguished Fellow from the Stimson Center. In Washington, D.C., Brian Becker, Executive Director of the Answer Coalition. In Beijing, Rong Ying, Vice President of CIIS, China Institute of International Studies. Gentlemen, what a pleasure to see all of you. Well, quite an occasion, the first presser by the President sitting in the White House. What is your general takeaway, Mr. McConnell?
Three things. I thought the president was clear and polite and determined, and I thought those were good traits for him to start out his first press conference with. He was primarily focused on domestic issues, getting over the pandemic, focusing on the economic recovery and creating jobs, and of course, immigration. In the foreign policy area, he told us that the number one concern is about North Korea, but of course there was a good exchange on China, which I'm sure we'll be discussing, but I thought he looked good.
All right. Mr. Becker?
The media was quite soft on Joe Biden compared to what Donald Trump press conferences looked like. I think that the media was strangely uninterested in COVID statistics. I mean, how could this be? Again, not a really hard-hitting press conference there. On China, I thought it was more of the same, sort of a follow-up with Anthony Blinken's bad performance in Alaska and Jake Sullivan's bad performance, very bad as hosts, treating their guests with such rancor. And I think it's clear that that this was not an anomaly, that Biden reiterated these points and said that China wants to lead the world and it won't happen on his watch, which maybe that's the real issue for America, not these other secondary issues that the United States really fears China's rise, which is unfortunate, I think.
We're going to go into some details, Mr. Becker, of some of the issues you just mentioned together with Mr. McConnell a bit later. Mr. Rong, what's your general takeaway?
I more or less, I think, agree with the two American colleagues. It seems that this is a quite well-managed press conference, and messages has been sort of sent out as planned. And of course, for the Chinese, very much, I think, listen carefully his President Biden's views about China. And I think what impressed me most is two things. One is that while he emphasized a lot about the competition, he made it very clear he does not want to see a confrontation between China, which I think can echo to the Chinese position in general. The other thing is, of course, I think I am very much impressed and amused to the extent that he tries best to combine its domestic agenda with the foreign policy issues. And I know this is the point. This is the message he would like to make, but I'm not sure. I would have our American colleagues' views how they have been made it well.
Very interesting. Different perspective certainly already here from the three of you, it seems that just a moment ago. Let me focus on some of the issues. First of all, the pandemic. That is the top priority. I'm very surprised that when the president was talking, not necessarily talking about the pandemic, but rather to say the vaccine. So, Mr. McConnell, how do you read this? Is he talking off the point?
Not at all. I think we're turning the corner on the pandemic here in America, and so
What do you mean by turning the corner,
we...
scientifically speaking or politically speaking?
No, I think in terms of people are getting vaccinated, the vaccination rates are going up, our death rates and hospitalizations are going down. So we're making progress, and I think people are ready in America to turn to other things while we continue to work, and it remains the number one priority domestically.
Mr. Becker?
I don't think that's quite accurate. I wish it were true, but the death rate actually has gone up in the last week for COVID, and there's new surges.
The long-term rate is going down.
Well, the rate went up by 2% yesterday. It went up 2% the day before. More than 1,000 died. When you think about 1,000 Americans dying each day, that doesn't seem like a lot anymore. But when you think about, say, what happened in Wuhan or Hubei or in China writ large, where you had less than 5,000 deaths and they didn't have forewarning, and you have Americans kind of being satisfied that we're turning the corner when we have 1,000 people dying each day, I just don't have the same sort of optimism. I think, yes, it's very good that so many people are getting vaccinated, and that is increasing, and that's a good sign.
Yeah.
But the healthcare system is a mess, and people are not accessing care properly. And even a great number of people don't want the vaccine because they're so skeptical about anything that the government says. So we have a very precarious situation with COVID-19 still.
All right, Mr. McConnell, of course, you need to respond to that.
I would just say that obviously we do things differently in America and in China, and that's one of the things the president talked about. And so, both systems have their pluses and minuses.
It's very interesting you talk about the system, and then I bring in Mr. Rong because some have seen it as a debate between different systems. The president was also trying to shape it that way, quote unquote, democracy versus quote unquote autocracy. And the president was also saying that the democracy needs to prove itself, it would work. That is pretty much looking at things with an ideological perspective. Now, is that related to the pandemic situation? Mr. Rong, looking from afar, what's your take?
How the government can work better in a sense that show the system is working. But I don't think it is, at least from Chinese perspective, would like to sort of present this competition as a kind of system. Rather, the Chinese is arguing that the system per se is because or formulated based on a kind of national conditions, level of development, cultural things. In other words, China is happy with this system as long as it works. And China does not want to impose his system on others. And China would also wish the United States successful in managing the issues, in particularly, I think, the problems arising from the COVID-19 and economic, I think, growth and recovery.
It's very important everybody will be a winner in the fight against the COVID-19 because none of us will be safe until that happens. That's very true. It's not a political slogan. It's not diplomatic. It's just how science works. Having said that, though, let me move on to another issue about ideology. That is something that we cannot avoid listening to the first presser by the president. There seems to be an apparent priority rearrangement by this administration, putting what the administration believes at the human rights at the very top level. Even though some argue there might be problems with the U.S. human rights record and also human rights reality. The anti-Asian hate is one of those phenomenons. Mr. McConnell, what is your take?
Well, I want to go back to the point that we have to find win-win solutions on this point. So yes, we have competition, and we have to cooperate. Also, we need co-opetition. So in this area, yes, there's different viewpoints, different ideologies, as you say. I'm surprised we are in an ideological discussion right now. I think there are many more practical problems that we could work together to solve and show leadership as the two greatest powers in the world, and that's what we should be focusing on.
Let me just bring back Mr. Rong, because China has been hesitating to talk about ideology, particularly when in a discussion with the U.S. When you hear what the president's answer is from the U.S. side about shaping it as a democracy versus autocracy, even though there might be debatable issues whether that categorization is correct or not. Mr. Rong, how do you see, the streamline of priorities by the current Biden administration from this press conference?
Biden more or less have the similar sort of priorities or issues on his agenda with Chinese and other leadership. For example, the people in the United States, as in those in China, they want to, at this moment, to have a normal life so that to manage the impact, fallout of a pandemic, they want to have a better life. Yes, the competition, but for the Chinese as concerned, we don't want to be sort of lectured that there's a system or there's a way to do which they believe is much better, because the Chinese said this is the way we are doing, and it has so far it's been very successful. But we don't want to mess up your business. We don't want to interfere in your business. Just do what you rather do. Just do whatever you're supposed to do.
Right.
I think that is more or less the feelings or sentiment of the Chinese, average Chinese, if I can say.
Mr. Becker.
Well, I think the tone, the lecturing tone of the United States adopts a position that the American system is a better system. You might frame it as ideology, but what the United States is essentially saying is that we are good. We are free people. And you, the Chinese, represent an authoritarian government, and you want to expand your authoritarianism so that other people don't enjoy the freedom that we enjoy and the freedom that we talk about to the other parts of the world. And I don't think this conforms to reality. I don't think the Chinese are trying to send their system anywhere else. I think the Chinese priority is to develop China, is to bring Chinese people out of poverty, to help China develop economically. And to do that, it needs to have economic trade with other countries. And it's offering economic terms for that trade, such as exists in the Belt and Road Initiative, which many countries consider to be favorable to them. So that is, in fact, in practice, a win-win. They develop, and China also has a way to gain resources and to access resources and to do trade.
Okay.
And the American government, as we can see in the presentation of this issue, framed as ideology, I don't think it's really purely ideology. I think they really fear that China is an advancing, new, rising economic power, and as such constitutes a real competition with a power that may be aging. And so the way it's framed is that this is good versus evil, when really it's the United States fearing that China's rise will somehow supplant the United States as the dominant economic power. And Joe Biden said as much when he said, China wants to be the leader of the world, but it won't happen on my watch. That has nothing to do with Xinjiang or Tibet or Hong Kong or Taiwan. These are all issues that I think become pretexts for what the real issue is, which is the United States fears, and I don't think it should fear, but it does fear China's economic development.
One of the things that I've noticed from this press conference, the word cooperation has not been very much emphasized.
I think you're exactly right. What we need is these two countries to work together on things where they have a common interest, like public health and the pandemic, like climate change, like nuclear stability and denuclearization in the Korean Peninsula. And those things provide an opportunity for these two great nations to show leadership while they're working out their differences. Everyone has differences, but we also need to work together. We have too little time on the planet. Things are happening too fast. We can't spend all our time fighting with each other.
Earlier, when Mr. Biden was serving as the vice president, when he was campaigning as a candidate, when he came into the office, the first, the speech that he gave, many of the messages is about cooperation. Many of the messages is about the U.S. needs to come back better. Better meaning does not mean that I'm getting better, not necessarily the others, right? Because you want to be a credible country in the world. So I don't know when the tone begins to change. Is it a change of tone of words or a change of heart and approach?
I think you're right. I mean, we need to lower the tone on both sides and try to avoid insulting each other. We can talk candidly in private, but in public, I think we should take a more cooperative approach. And we have a term we use in America, co-opetition. So on one day you compete with another company, and this day after that you cooperate with it. So that's the kind of relationship we need to have as mature adult countries.
In vaccines, for example, the former Secretary of State, Mr. Clinton, even spoke out, being with the same party with President Joe Biden, that U.S. should need to provide more vaccines to the other countries to even practice so-called vaccine diplomacy, whatever that means. But we haven't seen any of that, from this administration, except the promise of AstraZeneca vaccine to Canada. We don't know when that will be carried out, but not certainly to the developing and emerging economies. Today, we also learned from COVAX, the platform, that there's likely to be a delay of delivery to the COVAX platform vaccines to the emerging economies and developing countries because India manufacturers will not be able to provide certain crucial element of the product to produce those vaccines. So we're in a dire situation globally. How come this administration do not even talk about cooperation in terms of vaccines?
The need for cooperation is obvious, but the United States really has considered not only the Chinese handling of the healthcare crisis and the Chinese production of a vaccine, but also Russia and other countries that have been targeted in advance as major powers with which the United States is preparing for conflict. I mean, this is the operational doctrine of the United States, sadly, since 2018. And actually, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you prepare for major power conflict, if you budget, if you orient, if you plan contingencies, all designed to create a confrontation eventually with the other major power, then everything else falls in line with that. And then those who advocate for cooperation are considered soft on China or soft on Russia or failing to take China or Russia to task for human rights violations. So the atmosphere in America becomes very dark in a way. It becomes very difficult for people who know in their heart and in their mind that cooperation is greatly needed, right, that they're afraid to speak up because they don't want to be smeared as somehow being like an apologist for China. And this is the dangerous kind of Cold War atmosphere that exists not only between US and China, but inside the United States. And we've been here before. The American people have been here before.
Both China and many others in the world need to hear a sound message about how this administration will shape the international relations and also the strategies to use for that, so that there will be issues that can cooperate, they can cooperate together right now, so that there will be deliverables in the future. So Mr. Rong, how do you see the current approach and the current stage of this administration forming its policies right now?
That's a great question. That's exactly, I think, we are missing from this press conference. It seems that, of course, naturally, the president's first press conference for around 2 months in the middle of the 100 days sort of office, it would like to showcase what has been doing and what is going to do, and defending or presenting the progress that have been made so far, and looking ahead that what will be continued. But the one thing is missing, which I think our two American colleagues made very clear, and also your question raised, that the tone and the readiness for the United States to reach out to the international community, to reach out to other countries, China, Russia, and others, to manage to address this problem, not only for the world at large, of course, the United States is a major power, but for their own self-enlightened interest. And without that message, I think the United States is not going to have a good answer to that. And I understand that the society in the United States as a whole is very much divided. and the administration, Biden administration, is to some extent very much, I think, wary about that. But having the other talk about President Biden is going to be a transformational president. The presidency is going to be different.
Right.
This is the area. This is the time to show that, and then the presidency is different. And we're also impressed that he has, I don't know, officially or not announced he's going to run for the re-election. And these are the things I think which the international community is looking for. I think these are the things the American voters would like to have.
Mr. McConnell.
I think the bottom line of this is that you saw today the first press conference. We'll see more from President Biden. Obviously, domestic issues are the first priority, and we'll need to wait and see. They're in the middle of a China foreign policy review at the moment.
Yes.
So we'll see where they come out.
We did hear from the Secretary of Commerce, quote, U.S. is revising the strategy and to push back against China. That was the word being used. So many here are worried about what exactly it means.
I think it means, as the president said, that we're going to invest in technology and education and jobs and build ourselves, build back better, as he would say.
We understand, sometimes people need to create an enemy in order to do better and rally the morale back at home. But sometimes when you put a house on fire, it's very hard to extinguish it at the end of the day. Mr. Becker, I also want to have your final comment before we go.
I think the big issue for the United States in terms of global politics will be the China relationship. I think the United States has adopted this hostile position towards China without a real debate inside America.
Yes.
Suddenly, we had a new doctrine preparing the country for major power conflict. Suddenly, the media and the government issue only negative information about China. And public opinion in the United States, which was positive about China 10 years ago, has become negative. Why? Is this really the path that the United States wants to go on? And the fact that it's gone forward without a debate says to me that, though, like as you sort of suggested, we need an enemy. The Soviet Union's gone. Canada's not going to be much of an enemy. Mexico had a limited durability, but China's a rising power. And so you have the military-industrial complex, high-tech companies that are losing in international competition. Mm-hmm. Having an enemy is quite convenient. And sadly, this has changed the political atmosphere in America. And I don't think the American people will benefit from it. And certainly the people in China won't benefit from it. Okay. And certainly world peace won't benefit from it. And that's a sad day.
Brian Becker, Rong Ying, Bruce McConnell, always a pleasure. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for contributing your insights from different perspectives. Really appreciate it.